Welcome to the Sales Enablement Innovation Podcast, brought to you by the Sales Enablement Collective. Each episode, we sit down with sales enablement and revenue leaders from around the world and invite them to share their expertise and experience with the community. On this episode, we spoke to Alan McIntosh, SEC One to Watch for 2024 and part of RingCentral's enablement team. We discussed his experience in building scalable, effective rep certification programs and how you can learn to do the same. I hope you enjoy our conversation. On the show today is Alan McIntosh, who is an SEC One to Watch for 2024. Thank you, Alan, for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel. And again, really honoured to be listed among such amazing enablers. When you look down that list, there's just some incredible people. So very honoured to be listed, but also very honoured to be invited onto your podcast. So thank you very much.
Look forward to kicking it off. So before we sort of dive into our topic for today, could you sort of introduce yourself for our listeners and give a bit of background on your career, your expertise, and how you've gotten to this point in your career as well?
Yeah, for sure. So currently I am the International Channel Enablement Lead for RingCentral. I'm sure most people may be aware of us, and I'll let people Google if they're not. So really what that means is I'm responsible for looking after those channel sellers in the market and our internal channel sellers here at RingCentral across really UK, France, Germany and Australia. I'm glad to say Australia are a super team and don't call on me too often because that's a crazy time zone. When I look back in terms of career, really like a lot of people, I came into sales probably unplanned. Yeah. So being in the sales arena, I actually was doing the maths about 29 years. So after graduating computer science here in Glasgow, spent some time in retail, spent some time in wholesale, and then into broadband sales, really at a time when nobody had broadband. So we were truly selling the dream. Had a number of kind of leadership roles there, and then joined the tech sector, what I would call properly, by joining Hewlett-Packard at the time. Spent actually 17 years with them, fantastic organization, learned so much about selling particularly, but also about what we called sales training in those days, and then coaching and then sales enablement. Really, that was where I cut my teeth. So I saw the light after a number of years of sales management and thought, actually, I really enjoy helping others develop. I think I really enjoy coaching, and actually moved roles to become HP's first official sales coach. So spent 2 or 3 years working in that role, which really meant both coaching teams one-on-one, coaching teams in groups, leading boot camps, but also defining a sort of coaching framework and training managers in what then was still quite a new discipline, really, sales coaching. I've continued to stay very close to coaching. Actually, it's a real passion area for me. I haven't counted my coaching hours, but I'm sure it's up there by now. And really, what that helped me do was really get under the skin of how we sell, right? Because when you spend so much time selling, you don't really get a chance to step back and analyze it. But when you spend a lot of time sitting with someone one-to-one and listening to conversations, talking about conversations, coaching conversations, you get a really acute, I think, understanding of how sales process works, different types of buyers, different types of sellers, all that sort of thing. So spent 17 years there, and then again saw the light and was really keen to move into the SaaS arena. RingCentral presented that opportunity. I got a really great opportunity to join a phenomenal team here back in 2020. Really stellar enablement team, I have to say, led by Ben Purton, who I'm sure many of you, your listeners, will know. Just a fantastic team and a fantastic organization. And really, my role in the last 3 years, as I said, it's been a number of different roles, but today I'm focused on channel enablement, but also a number of internal strategic certification programs that stripe across our internal sellers and our sales leadership, specifically around coaching, actually. So lots going on. Hopefully lots more going on to come. There's plenty to do in a hyper-growth type company like RingCentral. And really, that's where I'm up to so far.
That's, I think, sort of perfect background for our topic today, especially, and it's really impressive to have that sort of pedigree on the podcast. So that's love to have that.
But going into our topic, it's very much about sort of bringing consistent scaled coaching and certification programs to a sort of faster growing company like RingCentral, which is what you've been doing. Like I said, so how do you sort of start that process, and where do you sort of identify the need for that sort of consistent and scaled coaching? Because I'm sure maybe some people can coach one-on-one in a smaller team, but then sort of scaling that is where sort of difficulty comes in.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think the starting is sometimes the hardest bit, right? Because we get very fixated on how do I make everything perfect? How do I do this? How do I do this? We don't sometimes start. And I think we have to start just by having dialogue and conversations. We need to be quite intimate with our sales leadership, intimate with our salespeople, and be listening and hearing and understanding. Because what we're doing there, like we do with customers, is we're starting to hear what's important and the why. So really, we always start at the why. So for me, if I look at how fast-growing RingCentral is, hyper-growth type company and continually evolving product, what we need to do as we continue to drive that growth and really scale into the enterprise spaces, we need to do things slightly differently. And I think that slightly differently starts with how do we become a very predictable organization as a sales force? Revenue organizations really need to have a predictability benchmark. And predictability for me always starts with consistency. So why, first of all, do we bring certifications at scale? Really, it's about how do we get a consistent baseline of competence and confidence, because the two are separate, at scale across a whole organization at the same time. Because for me, what that does is build a platform of success for everything else that follows. And that's why we do things, for instance, in Q1, timed around our kickoff to give us that launch platform for going up. So the why starts with really, that's why we're trying to do it. But then it's about going out and understanding from our sales leadership what actually matters. We in enablement shouldn't be the decision makers of what we're going to train often, because we can be seen as a factory generating content, but is it really what sellers need? Now, often we do know what they need, but getting that tacit buy-in from sales managers is critical. So we actually went out to about 40 to 50 of our leadership responded to quite a dense survey that we did. That allowed us to look at it from a data perspective. What are the key skills? What are the key competencies? What are the key activities we're doing that will be critical in 2024? And that allowed us to prioritize. And therefore, we now know 6 to 8 modules, as an example, in our sales certification, what most managers are saying is critical. And as you'd expect, most managers agree. They tended to come back with similar ideas. Any that didn't make it in the cut, that still got fed into sales enablement teams, so they were able to deliver those enablement elements locally. So we don't lose anything, it's all goodness. What that then allowed us to do was to go back to that sales leadership and say, so this is what you told us. This was the prioritization. Therefore, we now have North Stars. We know what we're trying to achieve. We've agreed a number of things as a leadership team, why we need to bring certification, what we're trying to achieve, and the content. Do you agree? What's the value in that? Well, we now have a tacit contract really with sales leadership to say, great, we're going to roll this out. You're going to commit to it. Now, I have to say, having worked in a number of different organizations, RingCentral's appetite for enablement has been incredible. We never have to fight for time. The managers are always keen on enablement. The reps are always keen on enablement. So we're never fighting uphill, as I have done sometimes in other organizations. But it's still good to know what we are bringing is what people really need. So that allowed us to do that. We then socialized that at scale. We go out to leadership teams, informally, formally, get everybody on the same page. Now, this is actually back in around October 2023 with a planned launch date of mid-January 2024. So the thing I would highlight here is this is not a quick job. This is something that takes time, getting everybody on board and taking them on the journey. Really, the next thing is about resources. Do I have the resources to be able to deliver this grand plan, right? So for me, again, it was about I want all our sales organization at the same time on a consistent level of enablement. And here we have a list of topics. So what you have to do then is decide, right, do I have resources that help me build this in the LMS? Just actually build the journey, manage the journey in the LMS. Do I have resources that help me build the content? And ideally, those resources want to be close to the floor and really understand the content. And do I have the resources to go out and advocate this, to drive it, to drive adoption, to message it, to troubleshoot? And do I have reporting resources? Because it's great doing these programs, but if you can't see what's happening and you can't actually communicate back to leadership, who we all know very quickly want to know where they stand, where am I in the leaderboard, is my team complete, then these things start to fail. So first of all, I would say that, it sounds like I have this massive team. No, we don't. A lot of this was done over and above what I'd call the day job, but you do need to have these resources lined up, and you do need a project plan, in effect. Now, I'm really a suck at Excel, but I can do a basic project plan, and that's really what you have to do, and therefore, you then have to take those resources on the journey as well. They have to understand the North Stars, because if they understand the why we're trying to do things, then when you ask them to generate content, they know the goal, and they're really clever people, so they can develop that content with that goal in mind. You don't have to manage it the whole way. What does help, I find, is creating templates. So anyone you're asking to create content, I'm a great believer in the rule of 3. So I create templates built into 3 sections, with each section having learning checks. I have scripts for the intro. I have scripts for the outro. And that takes a lot of that lift off of the content developers, and they can focus just on developing the content. But what it gives is a very consistent look and feel. Why is that important? The learner journey. The learner journey then feels comfortable. I know what the format is. I know what's coming next. I can focus on the content. I don't need to worry about, do I need to press a button, or where am I going next, or how does it work next? Yeah. So really, to build, that's where we were up to, right? So we got to a point around RKO where amazing team had built the key modules. We'd got them locked in. Our amazing digital team had built it into the LMS system. We'd smoke tested it. We'd walked the journey, and the reporting team were ready to go. So for me, I always have to give a massive shout out to kind of, it sounds like a cast of thousands. It's a lot of people. It is a small village, but in all different parts of the business. And really that's enabled us, particularly for the sales certification, the RingCentral Certified Seller Program, really to launch that with confidence right around our sales kickoff in mid-January of this year.
That's really interesting. I love the insight. I guess off the back of that, I'm wondering how does the sort of uptake from the sellers look? How do you make sure that the sellers are bought in and actually, you've put in all this work to, put this big sort of learning journey together? How do you make sure that everyone actually sort of gets on board with it and the sellers are taking it? How much of that is sort of working with the sales team, like the managers, and then how much of it is kind of incentivizing reps to sort of take it? I guess, how do you look at that adoption piece after you've put in all that work? Yeah,
for sure. So I think, again, back to socializing. So we did pre-comms quite a lot. We talked about, and we recognize we are a phenomenal sales force in the industry already, but that's about not resting in your laurels. That's about what are we continually doing extra. And again, I mentioned the RingCentral sales organization is quite an appetite for enablement. We're a very fast-moving organization. We're constantly bringing new solutions to market. The market is changing. And that sales organization looks for us as enablers to help them be confident. But of course, so you need to still get them to buy in. First point is it's hyper-relevant content. So we looked at it from really a pipeline perspective. We made sure we had early pipe training, mid pipe training, and late pipe training, and those key skills that everybody really universally was going to need. And a lot of that focus was about multi-product positioning, persona positioning, storytelling, negotiating, all of those skills that everybody uses, but you have to continually evolve. And multi-product for us particularly is a really big focus. So we launch that out, we communicate that out in large comms format. We also communicate that into local team format, and we do regular updates back to everyone on progress. So that's one side of the coin for the sales reps. But what we also always have to make sure, and this really counts for any large enablement program, is how do we link the manager to it, like in synergy and really, really closely. So actually in parallel, we launched a Coach for Growth certification for the managers. And that was designed in such a way that we were delivering really strong coaching skills for managers and, have a real passion for that. So we did that globally, around 150 sales leaders across a few weeks. But we included in that a number of elements that, let's say, drove adoption on both sides. So we trained the managers, we provided the managers with a playbook that gave them coaching tips and coaching questions aligned to each of the modules we delivered to the sales reps. So right away, the managers can lean in on those skills we've trained and coach the rep to go in and take them into field and execute them. A lot of the conversation we had was we're training the reps to execute, we're training the managers to coach that execution. That's really what it was about. We then tied the certifications together. So for the managers to certify as Coach for Growth certified, the reps actually had to log 3 coaching sessions they'd had with their manager and define the discussion, the content, what they were trying to achieve, and the plan they agreed. And so that meant really the manager had to engage with the reps in a way. The reps understood that and they got that feedback. And then for the reps to fully certify, they had to do really a sort of mini stand and deliver once they'd completed the training to demonstrate to the manager that they were competent. Now, we allowed them to do that in different ways. It could be call coaching, it could be in-field ride-along, it could be a formal presentation, it could be a role play. We left that up to the manager. They're smart people to do what's most appropriate. And then they would issue the certification and the badge. Both programs came with a certificate and a badge that, of course, we encouraged to be promoted onto social channels. So rolling that back, really what I'm saying is it's about hyperconnection, right? We're training the reps in one lane and we're training the managers in another lane, but the lanes then converge and they make sure that they're intrinsically linked and everybody's hyper aware of what we're trying to achieve. And the feedback from both programs actually has been excellent, which is great.
That makes a lot of sense. And I really love that idea of sort of tying them to each other, because those people should be working together anyway, and it's just sort of emphasizing that sort of collaboration. It actually brings me onto one of the other questions I was going to ask, which is how do you sort of measure the success of these programs? You touched on it a little bit in terms of how the reps get certified and the managers get certified, but what do you as a sort of enablement team look like? Is it X amount of people completed the certification and, manager rep pairs got certified, or sort of what are those sort of key metrics that you're looking at to say, hey, this worked and we can sort of build off of this, versus, okay, maybe we have to go back to the drawing board a little bit?
So it's the kind of the $64 million question, is it? Measurement. And we all love measurement and enablement. It's always a tricky subject. So again, this is the first at scale certifications of this style we've brought to RingCentral. So for me, as an enabler, partly that's a cultural shift, right? What we're now doing is defining these consistent scale platforms on which you build on. So in terms of revenue metrics, I think we're a little bit early to try and tie those revenue metrics, because this is a program delivered over a number of months at scale, and a lot happens in the sales floor over those months, a lot of moving, shifting sand. So initially, as you kind of mentioned there, we look at completion rates and sort of engagement rates. For me, frankly, phenomenal. With 97% of our leaders have managed to take the training, and we've so far certified 32 out of about 121 managers. So the level of engagement from managers, but also the speed of them getting into it and getting on board with it, really has been great. We've also had direct feedback from a number of managers and very senior leaders of managers who also joined these programs to just say, this has been a great program. The structure is easy to use, it's working, and we're actually seeing the reps think about their behaviors like in a self-coaching methodology. So we're really starting to change that culture. For the reps, like most enablement programs, or certainly that I've worked on, we set typically anything north of 80% completion is a green, right? Because there's always movement in the organization. Getting to 100% on a scale program is really quite hard. There's always somebody out for some time, or a new hire joins and the numbers start to. So we're already with some teams almost at the 90% mark, many teams around 70, kind of heading towards 80 mark. So by the end of April, I do expect as to really be green across the board in terms of seller participation, seller engagement, and seller completion. And again, feedback on particular modules. People have taken the time to reach out to myself or the module creators to say, that really was a great module. Again, I'll call out Ben Purton here. He did a negotiation module for us, and people just raved about it. Personally, and I don't give so much praise. I have a very high standard. I thought it was one of the best training events I've ever seen, so it was fantastic. But really, it's been that engagement. Now, when I start to see the coaching logs building up, that's a real success for me as well, because what I'm seeing is real engagement now with sales managers in a structured way to change behaviours. Sales managers are always talking to their sales reps, but being a sales manager, you've possibly a sales manager yourself, it's an incredibly busy role, it's a frenetic role, and often it's about, where's the number? How do we get the number? Forecasting, commit, how do we move it on? So it's often deal review. So what the managers really embraced here was stepping back to take time specifically to look at coaching skill and taking the time to follow like a GROW methodology to really walk some of those early indicator skills, because that's really what we're trying to push the organisation that will deliver those outcomes. So when I see those rates of coaching logs, I find it fantastic, because I'm seeing therefore true engagement. And I think really just having managers come and talk to me about, what do you think about this scenario? What do you think about that scenario? Have you got... It just shows they're intrinsically now engaged culturally, and that is a real success marker for me.
I really like that. I think that makes a lot of sense, and a nice sort of mix of the quantitative and qualitative there. You sort of mentioned the revenue metrics. Is that something where you sort of revisit 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line? How did these sort of modules impact sort of the end number after you sort of given it a bit of time to take effect? Or are you sort of happy with that sort of the cultural change that you've been driving? And once you can see that, that's sort of the main priority.
Yeah, so for a number of years in different organizations, we've looked at tying core metrics to these type of programs. I think when you do very specific programs like, let's train on a product this week, and then we can monitor whether we see growth in that product over, say, a 3-month cycle, that's relatively easy to do. I think when you're doing a multidiscipline soft skill program like this at scale over time, for me personally, I think it's risky to try and tie direct revenue metrics to that. We, of course, focused in on, for example, multi-product. So we're very interested to look at the multi-product mix in the pipeline going forward. And I will draw any relevant metrics from that without over-rotating to claim success is probably what I would say. So yeah, I think initially, and again, because this year is the first time we've really launched these programs, for me it's the engagement level and completion level. But however, second to that, we are seeing a vast increase in our coaching culture. We've actually introduced an AI-driven coaching tool in RingCentral, which we take to market, we use internally, called RingSense. So we're also seeing the volumes there, that volumetric type activity, but we're seeing now the use of the GROW coaching methodology in those conversations. So yes, I think it's behavioural and cultural rather than revenue at this point. One success, though, that I'm particularly proud of is at our kickoff, we had one of our UK leaders who's a real advocate of coaching anyway, and she ran a GROW coaching session en masse. We had about 60, 70 people in the room. Everyone walked the process. Everyone defined their goals, the realities, their options and way forward. And she had people actually come to the front of the room who were comfortable to talk about it. And for me, that was like just seeing that methodology come really into play. And I actually met with another leader yesterday who's having an entire offsite built around the GROW methodology to look at territory development for 2024. Those, for me, are real put a pin in it moments where we can see the adoption. And it's just a shift in thinking. You know, what surprised me when I was doing the training, particularly with the managers, was how few had come across this methodology before. This was really a new methodology. So we always have to remember that it's new for a lot of people. Therefore, we can get a nice incremental speed bump on skills and understanding for sure.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, the culture piece is just so important, and it could really revolutionize an organization. One thing I'm thinking is, so going forward, you sort of built this sort of program, it's been scaled and it's looking successful. How do you make sure that sort of subsequent programs like sort of build on top of that, rather than sort of it being a totally separate thing? Like, how do you ensure that each program that's going out being scaled is aligned and sort of ultimately isn't sort of ending up siloed, or sort of just, this is one program, this is another program? How do you make sure that sort of each effort is unified, I suppose?
Yeah, so again, I think it's a great question. So I'm going to stick with probably the coaching intervention aspect. So we collaborate very tightly as an enablement team globally. As you understand, we have different program managers, but we deliberately set out to say, okay, if we're going to be doing, which we are, follow-on modules in Q2, Q3, and Q4 now around coaching, if we have, for example, this RingSense coaching tool, let's make sure we tie those two together, right? So we're truly dogfooding internally our own product, but we can't have two disparate programs, right? So from here on in, it's coaching with RingSense. And so therefore what we're doing is we're amplifying the skills, but in a sort of synergized way. In terms of the sales people's programs for the certified seller, we are now moving to look at, for example, process certification. So if you imagine the sort of triangle of product, soft skills, and process, we're continuing to make sure we're hitting each of these pillars. Again, we've got an organization who's hungry for enablement, and these were skills that were universal. So it's more about making sure that we have future training that amplifies and echoes, repeats these methodologies. And I think we've chosen ones that really we're able to do that with. But then any incremental things we bring, if we bring a new program, it has to echo the language. So again, if it's a leadership program, we're talking about coaching, let's make sure we reference the language we used in that. If we're training a rep on a multi-product, let's make sure again to echo and resonate and amplify the language you've already used. Because again, for a learner, that provides comfort. And okay, yeah, I remember you told me it this way. You're not asking me to do it a different way now. You're reminding me how to do it with a little bit of an uptick so you can do more. So it is about continually making sure we're not launching things in a vacuum. We're not just unilaterally taking programs out to the sales force, that we're all making sure we talk and we look for opportunities within those certifications to link back to previous learning.
That makes a lot of sense. And I really like that about sort of the echoing the language. It's a really good point, because sometimes you can get these, you're sort of almost learning the same thing, but it's being presented to you in so many different ways that it's hard to actually take it in. So I really like that. I've got one eye on the time at the moment, but I'm thinking, as one of our listeners, they're on board, they're looking to sort of take some of these learnings. But I'm wondering, what are some of maybe the challenges that you faced, or so maybe a pitfall that you came across that you sort of had to overcome in this project that sort of you can, prepare listeners for if they maybe wouldn't have been expecting it in their own organization?
Yeah. So while it wasn't a massive challenge, I think I would say to everybody, again, make sure you have the buy-in. So don't run into that roadblocker because you didn't spend the time to socialize, to communicate, to gather input, and then take that input back out to leadership. Yeah. If you do, likelihood you will hit a speed bump. So that's about prevention rather than cure. I think as well, you have to make sure the LMS journey works for you. So take time to frame out the LMS journey, even create a fake pathway if you need to in the LMS, fully smoke test it. Think about the different journey paths that learners might attempt to take. Make sure it does what you think it's going to do, because the more you can smooth that journey for the learner, the more likely they're going to adopt it and be happy to come back and do more in the future. If it's a clunky experience for the learner, you run into problems, it's going to sour that taste, right? And they necessarily won't want to do it again. And because we are asking them to take a multi-module, multi-learning check, certified program, it's longer. So again, something to avoid is to make it too long. Don't have 20 modules in there, right? 6 to 8. Keep it digestible. No longer than an hour per module, even maybe 45 minutes. Try and keep it animated, try and keep it engaged. But coming back to the LMS a little bit, the reality of journeys in LMSs is they sometimes can be a little bit, they can have foibles, let me put it that way. No system's perfect. So having your LMS provider very close, having a technical account team ready to help you troubleshoot is really important, right? And again, making sure that you have those resources we talked about end to end in place, ready, comfortable, with agreed and understood deadlines. Leadership having agreed and understood deadlines and us all being on the same page is really important. Communication governance is probably the final part of that. You're going to be doing a lot of communication at launch, during progress, when you feel you need to drive a little bit of acceleration and adoption, when you need to call out maybe there's teams potentially who aren't engaging with it, and there's various reasons why it happens, so you need to lean in. But you have to make sure that the communication is consistent. It's really on message. It's not penalising, it's always celebrating. So having a comms team, having a little group that works to make sure what are we communicating when, have we greenlit it, where are we communicating that is really important as well. Because if we confuse leadership or we confuse the mass learner groups by miscommunicating something, again, we're just going to impact that engagement. So it really does come back to resource, but it comes down to thinking across those pillars and having that plan, and fundamentally having, like myself in this case, someone who's leading that program. And really, I didn't do the heavy lifting, right? We had all these teams doing incredible work. I'm really just the conductor of that orchestra. But it is a critical role, and you need to make sure people understand that governance. When you have north of 1,000 reps, north of 150 sales leaders, communication has to be on point. Yeah.
I 100% believe that. I think unfortunately that's all we have time for, but I thought that was brilliant. I really learned so much. So thank you for coming onto the show and sort of sharing that with our listeners. I'm 100% sure that they'll have found that valuable as well. Just thank you for taking the time. It's much appreciated.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to seeing further podcasts in the series. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks for tuning in to the Sales Enablement Innovation Podcast. Be sure to follow us on your podcast platform of choice so you don't miss a thing. And if you're hungry for more sales enablement content, visit our website, salesenablementcollective.com, for articles, events, and an easy way to join our Slack community, home to thousands of your sales enablement peers.